The Kremlin is now considering a Ministry of Sex to tackle the nation's population crisis due to the war in Ukraine. Some of the initiatives include cutting off the internet and electricity at night to encourage intimacy. Once set up, the Russian ministry would fund dates, pay for weddings, and give hefty cash payments to first-time mothers.
In September 2022, something unprecedented happened. Over 700,000 Russians, many of them men in their 20s and 30s, fled the country in a matter of weeks. It wasn't for better jobs or education, it was to escape a war. Fast forward to today, and an alarming question looms. Why are so many young men disappearing from Russia's population? Is it war, emigration, or something far deeper? Let's dive into the numbers, the history, and the consequences of this crisis that's reshaping the nation. Before the war in Ukraine, Russia was already grappling with a demographic problem. The country's population had been declining for decades. In 1991, low birth rates, high death rates, and emigration were the main culprits. For decades, Russia relied on its working-age population, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, to keep its economy afloat. Among them, men in their early 30s played a crucial role. This group was the backbone of industries like energy, manufacturing, and technology. They were also the next generation of leaders, scientists, and innovators. However, even before the war, fewer and fewer young people were entering the workforce. Russia's fertility rate, the average number of children a woman has in her lifetime, was 1.5 in 2021, far below the replacement level of 2.1. This meant that every new generation was smaller than the one before. At the same time, life expectancy for men was just 68 years, significantly lower than in other developed nations. Alcohol abuse, smoking, and poor healthcare all contributed to this. By the late 2000s and 10s, policymakers were already warning of a looming demographic crisis. But instead of addressing these issues, the government made choices that would accelerate the problem. In 2022, everything changed when Russia invaded Ukraine. The war didn't just put pressure on the economy and international relations, it created a demographic shock. Mobilization efforts targeted men between the ages of 18 and 50, but reports showed a disproportionate focus on younger, able-bodied men from rural areas. This led to massive disruptions in the very population Russia couldn't afford to lose. What happened next was unprecedented. In the wake of the September 2022 partial mobilization, hundreds of thousands of young men fled Russia. According to reports, up to 700,000 people left in just 2 months. This wasn't just a brain drain, it was a hemorrhage of the workforce. These were the people who would have driven innovation, fueled economic growth, and supported aging relatives. By the end of 2023, experts estimated that Russia's working-age population had shrunk by 3% due to emigration and war casualties. Many of those who remained faced uncertain futures, with reports of rising deaths on the battlefield. The demographic consequences were beginning to unfold, but the full scale of the problem was yet to come. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, it triggered a demographic crisis with ripple effects across every layer of society. Mobilization efforts targeted hundreds of thousands of men, primarily those between the ages of 18 and 50. This left families and workplaces struggling to cope with the absence of husbands, fathers, and workers. By late 2023, estimates indicated that nearly 300,000 Russian soldiers had been killed, wounded, or captured in the war. These casualties disproportionately affected men in their 20s and 30s, creating a devastating demographic gap. For comparison, this number is nearly twice the Soviet Union's casualties during the decade-long war in Afghanistan. The ongoing conflict has made this generation of young men Russia's missing middle. At the same time, emigration surged. Over 1 million Russians left the country between 2022 and 2024, according to government and independent reports. The majority were young, skilled professionals, IT specialists, engineers, doctors, and entrepreneurs. Many fled to nearby nations like Kazakhstan, Georgia, and Turkey. Others sought refuge further afield in Europe and Asia. The loss of these individuals not only drained Russia of its talent, but also deepened the demographic crisis. For families left behind, the war and emigration created economic hardships. Women, often tasked with caregiving responsibilities, were forced to take on additional work to make ends meet. Rural areas, where mobilization rates were highest, saw entire communities gutted of their male population. Small businesses struggled to find workers, while larger industries like construction and manufacturing faced severe labor shortages. The ripple effects extended to the economy as a whole. Russia's GDP contracted by 2.1% in 2022, and the International Monetary Fund projected slow recovery in subsequent years. Much of this stagnation can be attributed to the shrinking workforce. In industries like technology and energy, sectors critical to Russia's global standing, the loss of skilled professionals has made it difficult to maintain operations and innovate. In addition to the immediate economic effects, the war is reshaping family dynamics in Russia. With so many men absent or lost to the conflict, women are increasingly becoming the heads of households. This shift has raised questions about how society will adapt in the long term. Will the traditional structures of Russian family life change, or will the state step in to provide support? Meanwhile, the government has launched initiatives to address the demographic crisis. Policies encouraging higher birth rates, such as financial incentives for families with multiple children, have been expanded. However, experts warn that these measures are unlikely to be effective without a stable, peacetime economy and a resolution to the war. The demographic challenges facing Russia are unprecedented. As the conflict drags on, the country's workforce is shrinking at a rate not seen since World War II. This has created an urgent question. How will Russia rebuild its economy and society with an entire generation of men missing? As the war continues, the demographic and workforce challenges facing Russia are leading to critical questions about its future. The country is now grappling with a stark reality: rebuilding an economy and society that has lost a significant portion of its younger, most active population. From an economic perspective, the outlook is grim. Analysts predict that Russia's shrinking workforce will lead to stagnation in industries that have historically driven its economy, such as energy, mining, and manufacturing. For instance, the energy sector, responsible for over 40% of Russia's federal budget revenue, has been hit hard by the loss of skilled workers and international sanctions. Without innovation and talent, maintaining global competitiveness will become increasingly difficult. The technological sector, once a point of pride for Russia, is another area of concern. The exodus of IT specialists and engineers has left a void that the country has struggled to fill. By 2024, several tech companies reported a 20% decline in operations due to staffing shortages. These losses undermine Russia's ambitions to position itself as a leader in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and digital infrastructure. Socially, the demographic crisis has far-reaching consequences. A population dominated by older generations places immense strain on public services, particularly healthcare and pensions. With fewer young people entering the workforce, the tax base will shrink, making it harder for the government to fund these programs. By 2050, experts warn that Russia's population could drop below 130 million, a sharp decline from its peak of over 148 million in 1991. The psychological toll on the younger generation is another concern. Those who remain in Russia face limited economic opportunities, the constant threat of conscription, and an uncertain future. Many have expressed a desire to leave the country, further accelerating the brain drain. For those who cannot emigrate, feelings of hopelessness and disillusionment are becoming increasingly common. Globally, Russia's demographic challenges weaken its position as a superpower. Historically, the country has relied on its vast resources and military strength to maintain influence. However, a smaller and less skilled workforce jeopardizes both. The ongoing war has already strained the military, with reports suggesting that conscription efforts are now targeting older men and even those with health issues. If this trend continues, Russia's ability to project power abroad will diminish. Moreover, the demographic crisis affects Russia's relationships with key allies and trading partners. Countries like China and India, which rely on Russian energy exports, are beginning to seek alternatives due to concerns about long-term supply disruptions. Within global diplomatic circles, Russia's shrinking population and workforce undermine its ability to negotiate from a position of strength. Domestically, the government faces mounting pressure to address these issues. While state-controlled media continues to downplay the demographic crisis, the reality is impossible to ignore. Protests have erupted in some regions, with citizens demanding an end to the war and better economic opportunities. However, the government's response has been to tighten control, further stifling dissent and driving more people to emigrate. Russia's demographic crisis is not just a statistic, it is a defining challenge that will shape the country's future for decades. The combination of war, emigration, and a declining birth rate has created a perfect storm that threatens to erode Russia's economic, social, and global standing. As the world watches, one question looms large. Can Russia adapt and rebuild, or will it continue on this downward trajectory?